All right, so you've requested a deep dive into some pretty heavy stuff, the
Yeah.
effects of a nuclear bomb on the human body.
Right.
And
It's a weighty subject.
it is. It's really important to understand these weapons in the world today, though.
Absolutely.
So we're going to break it all down for you. The immediate impact, surviving the aftermath, and then the long-term consequences.
The long tail.
Right, so we can really wrap our heads around the full scope of this kind of event.
It's important to remember that the effects of a nuclear detonation, they aren't just limited to the initial blast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're talking about a cascade of consequences here, stuff that impacts entire communities and can even affect generations to come.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's start with that initial, most immediate, and most, I don't know, visceral effect.
Hmm.
The blast itself, I mean, we've all seen footage of nuclear tests.
Right.
But do we really grasp the power? I mean, can you help us understand the power that we're talking about here?
Yeah, imagine a force so strong that it can level buildings like instantly,
No.
turns everyday objects into deadly projectiles just flying through the air.
Look.
And the shock wave from a nuclear blast, it travels faster than the speed of sound,
Oh, wow.
creates this just unbelievable destructive force unlike anything you could ever experience in your life.
So it's not just the explosion then, right? It's like the debris
Yeah.
and this force of the shockwave.
Exactly. It all poses an immediate threat. Yeah.
And then there's the heat.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget about that. The intense heat from the explosion,
Yeah.
it can cause third-degree burns over huge areas, and we're talking like instantly. Like in the blink of an eye, you're severely burned.
Oh,
These aren't just, a little kitchen burn.
yeah.
These are life-threatening without immediate medical care. And even then, with specialized care, it's still very difficult to treat.
That's a horrifying thought.
Yeah.
And then you also wanted to understand radiation exposure. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So along with all that heat and the blast, a nuclear detonation releases a massive amount of radiation.
Right.
That includes things like gamma rays and neutrons. These are highly energetic particles that go right through the human body, and they damage cells and tissues as they pass through.
I remember learning about acute radiation sickness, or ARS, back in school.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, exactly. ARS is one of the most immediate and scary consequences of radiation exposure. The severity really depends on the dose of radiation someone's been hit with, but even relatively low doses can lead to some pretty debilitating symptoms.
Yeah.
Things like nausea, vomiting, fatigue. You start losing your hair.
So what happens if someone is exposed to a higher dose?
Higher doses, that's when things get even worse, potentially life-threatening. You're talking internal bleeding, your organs start getting damaged, and your immune system, forget about it. It's basically bombarded with all this energy so your body can't keep up, and it just starts shutting down. It's a brutal and often a very agonizing process.
Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
It's hard to even fathom all the suffering that would follow something like this. But let's say you manage to survive that initial blast and those immediate effects of the radiation. What happens next? What are you up against?
I mean, just surviving in the aftermath would be incredibly difficult. You're dealing with so much widespread destruction, limited access to medical care, and the very real threat of contamination from fallout.
Right.
Even what might seem like a minor injury could turn really bad really quickly and even become life-threatening.
Because of that weakened immune system you talked about.
Exactly. The radiation just suppresses all the body's natural defenses, and you're left wide open to infections.
Yeah.
A simple cut or a burn, something that you might not even think twice about normally, that could turn fatal very quickly.
That takes us to those long-term consequences. You wanted to know about those lasting health effects of a nuclear detonation. Where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, one of the biggest long-term risks is cancer. Radiation has this nasty habit of damaging DNA, the genetic blueprint of our cells. This damage, it can lead to mutations that cause cells to just grow and divide uncontrollably, which is how you get cancer.
So this isn't just a risk for people who are right there exposed to the blast.
No, not at all. The effects can linger for decades. And then there's fallout to think about, the radioactive particles that come down after a nuclear explosion. Fallout can contaminate enormous areas, huge, and it can get into the food chain, the water supply. It's a long-term risk for anyone who comes into contact with it.
Are there certain types of cancer that are more common after radiation exposure?
Yeah, leukemia is one of the most well-documented cancers that we see after exposure.
Leukemia, that's the cancer of the blood and bone marrow, right?
That's right. We saw it in the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yep.
And then we saw it again in those exposed to Chernobyl. And thyroid cancer is another one. We see that more often in people exposed to radiation, especially children.
It's terrifying to think that the consequences of these weapons, they can extend for generations.
Absolutely. And we haven't even really talked about the psychological impact, the trauma of going through something like this, losing your loved ones and not knowing what's next. That all leaves some deep and lasting scars.
I can only imagine PTSD would be incredibly common among the survivors.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, you name it. All kinds of mental health issues would be incredibly widespread. The mental and emotional toll of an event like this can't be overstated.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive,
Hmm.
and the impact of a nuclear detonation is far more complex and far-reaching than I think most people realize.
I agree.
It's not just about that immediate destruction.
Yeah.
It's about the long-term effects that it has on individuals, communities, and the world as a whole.
And this knowledge, it should push all of us to think really hard about these weapons and their role in the world. The consequences are just too massive to ignore.
Yeah, you came to us seeking knowledge, and I really hope that this deep dive has given you a deeper understanding of these devastating consequences.
Yeah.
So now the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? How can you use this to contribute to a safer world? I think that's something for all of us to consider, so thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And until next time, keep on seeking.
Keep on diving.
Yeah.
That's it.
Deep dive.
Deep dive.
That's it.
Okay, we got it.
We got.
We're good. All right, signing off. All right. See you there.
Bye.
Bye.